All right, welcome back to the channel. This is John from Wax and Relax Final Listening Room. We're going to look back 40 years ago today, going back to the year 1984. Had to get this one in before the end of the year, so we got the timestamp to show that this was done in 2024. So 40 years ago, 1984, that was the year where I was end of my freshman year, beginning of my sophomore year of high school. And when you're that age, music is everything. And it was a really, really solid year for music for all sorts of stuff. So I'm going to cover 10 records, tell you a little bit about the records themselves, what was happening around the time that they came out, and all that type of good shit. So I'm going to start number one in no particular order. Deep Purple, Perfect Strangers. This was interesting time if you were a fan of especially that whole British family tree of rock and metal. You had essentially Deep Purple in the 70s that blossomed into Whitesnake and so on and so forth after they kind of imploded. This was where it all came back together. In 1983, you had Ian Gillan, the lead singer, was actually in Black Sabbath for an album and tour. You had Ritchie Blackmore and Roger Glover were in Rainbow and had just had a successful run of a couple of records, and actually their biggest hit single was Street of Dreams, was all over the place in 1983. And Ian Pace and John Lord, the drummer and keyboard player respectively, they were in Whitesnake at the time. So it kind of all came together. They had a come to Jesus moment. They all decided to get along together and go check into the Manor and record a record. And as far as I'm concerned, it's my favorite Deep Purple record, and that's saying something because that's a rich, potent catalog. But the record came out, insert was very Iron Maiden, very homey touch of showing the guys playing soccer and at the pub and all those type of things. Kind of really made you feel like you're there in the pub with them at 14 years old. But yeah, great freaking record. Super important to me to this day. Next up, Rush, Grace Under Pressure. This was I had only been into Rush for a couple of years at this point. Like a lot of people my age, my entry point was with Moving Pictures in '81. So this was actually the first Rush album. Actually, it's the only Rush album that I bought on its release day, and that's kind of my sweet spot in there. Those '81 to '84 records. The Moving Pictures. Going back one more to Permanent Waves, Moving Pictures, Signals, and Grace Under Pressure, plus the live one. Great stuff. It was, this is kind of the beginning of their electric 80s era. Great stuff. Love it. Next up, Mirror Moves, Psychedelic Furs. This was the follow-up to 1982's Forever Now. And that was kind of my starting point with them, thanks to MTV. And this was good. This was kind of a little more poppy, sort of along the lines of when the Cure did their sort of poppier stuff, and maybe a little more dancey. Whereas it wasn't so, I guess, British, if that sounds. That sounds ridiculous, but Forever Now was a lot more of what was happening in new wave, whereas this was kind of branching out into the clubs and looking for that radio play as well. Great record. Ghost in You, I believe that's the one that Counting Crows covered, late '90s, I think. Can't remember. Number 4. I didn't want to create a list that had live albums, compilations, greatest hits type of thing, but this one definitely is needed to be on this list, and it's going to be Legend by Bob Marley and the Wailers. And reason being is because it is so important for not only Marley, but for kind of that second wave of reggae listeners. This was the entry, the gateway drug for my generation. Because I was born when Eric Clapton was in Cream and Blind Faith and all that type of thing. By the time he kind of dabbled in reggae with I Shot the Sheriff, I was 4 years old. So this was my generation's entryway into the world of reggae and Jamaican music, because a lot of us went backwards and discovered a whole world of great stuff that to this day we all still know and love. For me, my greatest love, reggae, speaking of reggae, is Steel Pulse. Absolutely my all-time favorite reggae band, reggae artist, and some of my favorite reggae records. This is just at the period where they're starting to dabble with success. And unfortunately for a lot of reggae bands, that means going a little more electronic. And that's when you first start hearing the electronic drums. It makes it very 80s sounding. In all honesty, Steel Pulse's best versions of these 80s songs are on the live records, because they're played with a real live band with a real acoustic drum kit, and you'll hear me say every once in a while whenever I talk about reggae that the best reggae records are live records. But this was frequent play all through the 80s for me. Just great stuff. Next up, this one is Tony Rice, Cold on the Shoulder. This is a bluegrass record. Tony Rice is the master of the Martin D28 acoustic guitar. His guitar has a long and storied past. It originally belonged to Clarence White. You may recall him from the Byrds. This was a very tortured guitar. It had been destroyed a couple of times. It had been the original owner, I guess, something with cigarettes around the hole, and burned the wood all the way out to the rosette, which meant that it had a larger than ordinary sound hole in the middle of the acoustic guitar. And this guitar has been underwater. It has been hit by cars. It's been destroyed and rebuilt several times, and every time it came back with a different personality, but always great sounding. And I don't know, I gotta wonder how much of that is also in the fingers of Tony Rice, because he was amazing. But what was cool about this record is he's assembled all these great players, assembled all these great songs, but this was the first record, and maybe the only one that he did, where all of the songs are vocal. And not only was he a great player, but he had a fantastic voice. The sad story would happen to him towards the end. Definitely worth investigating. If you get a chance, Tony Rice, Cold on the Shoulder. If you're a Gordon Lightfoot fan, he does a lot of Gordon Lightfoot stuff over his career. Gordon was his favorite songwriter, so definitely check it out. All right, this was huge in 1984. You could not get away from the video from the lead single off of this particular record, and it was when metal kind of had its coming out party. You had Quiet Riot in '83, and you had Twisted Sister, and all of a sudden, you were starting to see metal bands and hard rock bands and Sunset Strip bands popping out, along the likes of Duran Duran and Culture Club and things like that. And next thing you know, there's Rat out of the cellar. I think this sold a zillion copies to people who you would never have expected to buy, well, what we now call hair metal. We didn't call it that back then. Kind of a retrospective, I don't know, kind of a demeaning name, but back then it was just hard rock. It was metal. Then about 2 or 3 years after this, you had that split where you had the glam go one way, and you had the harder underground stuff went the other way. But in 1984, we all loved this shit. Still do. My son's recently discovered it, and he's kind of going down that road as well. Next one, I'm gonna go something local here. Savatage, The Dungeons Are Calling. This is actually issued on Combat Records, and this actual pressing came out in '85. But locally, it was issued in '84 on Par Records. Oddly enough, their classic first record that came out in '83, Sirens, and all the tracks off of this were all recorded in the same day. And they were able to pull 2 classic records out of that one day's work. Not bad. As many of you know, this is the band that morphed into Trans-Siberian Orchestra, and this particular copy is signed and personalized by John Oliva, the lead singer and the guy who basically started TSO. Yeah, great stuff. 6 tracks, plus all the tracks that were on Sirens. That's a hell of a day's work. Savatage, local heroes for us, for sure. Another one in 1984. How giant was this freaking thing? Even if you didn't like Prince music prior to this, everyone dug this record. It was everywhere, and it plays like a greatest hits because almost every song on here got massive play. There was videos for all of them. This was the album you heard coming out of car windows in the parking lot at school. Prince was a food group in 1984, and still sells a hell of a lot of records. I still think it's his finest moment. A lot of people think otherwise, but you know. Number 10. This is a controversial record for fans of this particular band. 1984, Van Halen. That's Van Halen right there. They broke up after this. They did. After that, they became Van Hagar. They became a lot nerdier. You know, Sammy's a great singer, but he's a terrible lyricist. Eddie got too involved in the keyboards, and in my opinion, they became a real pop band. But prior to that, when they had Dave, they had, you know, I hate to use that word swagger, but they had that, it was grittier, a little more, you know, underworld, a little more, I don't know. Dave just really was a lot more street than Sammy was. This record was interesting in that it was where they introduced the keys. So, you know, you've got Jump, and that was the record that became huge. And probably, for as big of a song as that was, it was probably the beginning of the downfall, because that's where Eddie wanted to move forward with that sort of sound. And, you know, that's where a lot of us jumped off. Picked it up again in 2012 when Dave came back and they did another record. Some of the songs on this record are leftovers from the demos from prior to the first record, when they did demos with Gene Simmons. So, you know, Girl Gone Bad and House of Pain, those are all older tracks. Other stuff that they did on here was fantastic. Even the real keyboard-driven I'll Wait was great. And apparently there's some controversy about whether or not how much of that was written with Michael McDonald, but interesting. 2 records that I would have put on the list, but I don't have them on vinyl. Hopefully at some point I'll locate them and put them on the list. But Hanoi Rocks, 2 Steps from the Move, one of my all-time favorite records, especially one of my top ones from 1984. That was the record that they were getting ready to tour for when there was a horrible accident where their drummer was a passenger in Vince Neil's car when they got in an accident. Unfortunately, Hanoi Rocks drummer Razzle was killed in the accident, and that pretty much ended the band until, you know, half-assed reunion many years later. But, you know, really killed this band in the prime. And that 1984 record was actually, at one point, Axl Rose wanted his band, Guns N' Roses, to cover the entire album as a tribute project, but that never happened. Another one from '84 that I can't find, and I know it's probably going to be expensive, is the Steve Vai, Flexible. This was before he was, you know, so metallic. At that point, he had spent, you know, his time. This was, you know, stuff that he'd recorded like right around the time when he was with Zappa. So there's a lot of that Zappa influence and kind of weirdness and peculiarities, and some of the songs don't even have really what you call like typical guitar work, but really cool stuff. Great recording considering the fact that it was all homemade. But yeah, definitely Steve Vai, Flexible, looking for that. But that's it. That's for the year 1984, 40 years ago. Those are 10 of the ones that I own, that I love, that still get regular play in my house. And as you can see, it's a good diverse load of stuff. But I still tend to go at that point, if I'm talking about 70s, 80s, there's gonna be a lot of metal involved. But good stuff, good year. Hopefully you like and subscribe to the channel. Give the video a thumbs up. Tell some friends about us. We just hit 50 subscribers. Woohoo! So excited about that. I would love to see some more, for no other reason than it's just nice to know that you're doing these things and people are, reaching out and saying, hey, oh yeah, I love that record, and that was my favorite song, or that was a album I lost my virginity to, or I got in a car accident with that, or whatever. I used to look at, whatever. So until the next time, we will see you on the B-side.